5 things I wish I was told about intellectual property when I turned 20. This entire conversation is premised on the view that intellectual property appears at any level, whether one is 12 or 21, whether one is 9 or 90. All of us, if we are just equipped, we can be able to begin to identify intellectual property. Hello, welcome to our channel, Franchise and Licensing Institute. We are the premier intellectual property firm from Nairobi, Kenya, operating all over Africa. Our main interest is to ensure that every person who appears at the marketplace receives a level of awareness and sensitization as regards intellectual property. Our main interest is so that you can begin to cultivate enabling career path for yourself, singularly relying on intellectual property. And if you are someone in entrepreneurship, we want you to begin to appreciate your available intellectual property as a significant ingredient in helping you model successive and globally competitive business models. Welcome to this class. We want to learn about 5 things I wish I knew about intellectual property when I turned 20. The first thing I wish, and this is number 1, I wish someone took time to introduce me to intellectual property, what it is, how it appears, and what I can do with it from as early as my 20th birthday. One of the most challenging things, particularly in the marketplace and how people approach intellectual property conversations, we usually approach intellectual property conversations from one of 2 areas. We are either talking about intellectual property purely from academic angle, and to that extent, we cannot extract usable value on intellectual property in the marketplace. So that is one. The other approach of intellectual property is we approach this conversation purely from a legal standpoint. And to that point, the only people who find these conversations useful are lawyers, judges, jurists, authors, students, lecturers, and people within the legal fraternity. Intellectual property is not necessarily a preserve for lawyers. Intellectual property is something that every person with a head needs to know. I am known for this one thing, that the only qualification someone needs to show in order to legitimately begin to use intellectual property is, do you have a head? If you have a head, you qualify for intellectual property. And so what are those differences that we have in intellectual property? 1, there is intellectual property. There is intellectual property rights. Then there is intellectual property law. These 3 things are not one and the same. Intellectual property is anything that you can create from your mind, which you as an individual should actually commercialize. Whether it's a song, whether it's a sketch, whether it's a recipe, whether it's a line of code, whatsoever you can come up with from your mind, it's your duty to commercialize. That gap between your idea, your thoughts, and the products that can come from your mind, that one is called intellectual property awareness. So intellectual property awareness is the ability in an individual to identify an appearance of intellectual property and how that person can convert that appearance into a product that can be consumed at the marketplace. So I wish in my 20s, someone helped me to distinguish between intellectual property rights, and intellectual property law. Intellectual property rights are merely privileges and recognitions that the state awards to an applicant who has filed for a specific acknowledgement or a specific reward from the state according to the laws of that land. Intellectual property rights does not confer anything on an individual that intellectual property awareness has not conferred on an individual. And that is why, largely whenever we are talking of intellectual property rights, we are doing a great disservice, particularly for the people who appear at the marketplace. Intellectual property rights do not confer on an individual value. Intellectual property awareness confers value on an individual. And intellectual property law, this is the body of law that governs the ecosystem of intellectual property from one country to another. So in this channel, we are not interested on intellectual property rights. In this channel, we are not interested in intellectual property law because majority of people that we will be interacting with in this channel are drawn from all over the world. So if there is something that connects all of us, regardless of your age, regardless of your gender, regardless of your creed, regardless of our religious persuasions, if there is something that connects all of us together, it is intellectual property. All of us wish to know, what is that thing that I can do with my IP at the marketplace? All of us wish to know, what is that thing that I can do with my knowledge at the marketplace, either in direct employment or an entrepreneur or someone in vocation or even someone in freelancing. That is the greatest thing that I would want all of us to begin to appreciate. I wish at my 20s, someone took time to introduce me to identify the appearance of intellectual property. Intellectual property makes appearance. To some person, intellectual property can appear like a talent. To another person, intellectual property appears like a skill. To another person, intellectual property appears like knowledge. To another person, intellectual property. So it is varied how intellectual property appears to us. So the most valuable thing that I wish you begin to entertain is for you to begin to appreciate, for you to begin to identify the intellectual property on you, intellectual property in the things that you do and how you go about doing them, and intellectual property all around you. At any given moment, regardless of your age, you have 3 layers of intellectual property. There is intellectual property on you. There is intellectual property on the face value of your business. There is intellectual property in the things that you do and how you go about doing them. Then there is intellectual property in the processes of your business. Then there is intellectual property all around you at an individual level and even all around your business through the ecosystems that you have set up in your venture. So that's one of the most valuable things that I wish someone told me when I was turning 20. The second thing that I wish I learned about intellectual property, I wish I knew that intellectual property is not a respecter of persons, religion, gender, or social status. If there is something that equalizes all of us, it is intellectual property. The only thing that limits an individual from making the most of their intellectual property is your level of curiosity, your level of interest. I wish in my 20th birthday, someone told me that intellectual property can go to work on your behalf, even if you're 20. I wish someone introduced me to intellectual property, that intellectual property can equalize you at the marketplace, that intellectual property can work for you the same way other resources are working for some other people. That is the most amazing thing I wish I discovered about intellectual property. Our society is structured on certain prejudices. Our society is structured on certain considerations. There are places you might not appear because of your creed. There are places you might not be welcome to because of your religious persuasions. There are places you cannot enter because of your gender. But if there is something that can break all these walls of hostility, if we appear at the marketplace is not a respecter of gender. The marketplace is not a respect of religious persuasions. The marketplace is only a respecter of value. And if I had known when I turned 20 that intellectual property can make me a person of value, I cannot even imagine what I would be doing today. Intellectual property appears on any individual, and intellectual property enables you to be a bearer of value in your marketplace when you appear in your marketplace. And that's the most useful, that is the most meaningful, that is the most enabling thing that any person can understand. I might not have gone to the same school you went to. I might not have the same talent that you have. But if I can just identify my intellectual property, then that awareness equalizes all of us, because when it's all said and done, at the marketplace, we are all bearing value. That, my friend, is something that is very important. Whether you're a parent, whether you are an uncle, whether you're a grandparent, or even if you're lucky enough to watch this when you're turning 20, I want you to understand that you have something that can help you create value. That thing can be your talent, that thing can be your skill, that thing can be your hobby, that thing can be your expertise, that thing can, it is boundless, it is limitless. So I wish I was told that intellectual property does not respect gender, that intellectual property does not respect age. The third thing I wish I was told is I wish I knew that intellectual property is an equalizer. No two intellectual property are the same, but whatever your form of IP, it gives all of us the same footing. In the marketplace today, our marketplace, we are trying to move away from the traditional models of the market. In the traditional models of the market, an individual appeared either as a bearer of tangible good or as a bearer of service. That has not changed. What has changed is how we arrive at these goods, how we arrive at this service. In our time, knowledge has become a factor of production, that there are pockets in the marketplace that you can exclusively appear in as a bearer of knowledge. There are pockets in the marketplace that you can exclusively appear in as a bearer of idea. So we have aspects of our economy that are purely pushed by ideas. So we are calling them the idea economy, the knowledge economy, the talent economy. So what intellectual property does to all of us is intellectual property can enable you participate in the knowledge economy. If you can just be aware of that knowledge that you bear to the marketplace, that knowledge that you bring to the marketplace, from which we can extract consumable service, from which we can extract consumable goods. Because I want you to understand, in our time, knowledge is a form of raw material. I want you to understand talent is a form of raw material. I want you to appreciate that ideas are a form of raw material. And in this ecosystem, in this marketplace, what intellectual property does to all of us is intellectual property can give us the same footing in the marketplace, regardless from which angle you appear at the marketplace. We are in a marketplace that an athlete like Usain Bolt can convert his identity and create a company out of it. We are in a market space whereby someone can convert a phrase, something like, "Are you ready to rumble?" Something like that, which Michael Buffer converted into a company from which he has generated more than 400 million US dollars. Intellectual property, regardless of what form of intellectual property you bear, intellectual property can equalize you. In areas where you feel as an individual you're inadequate in areas where you feel as an individual you have deficiency, intellectual property can minimize that. Intellectual property can equalize that. That I wish I was told when I was turning 20 years. I wish I was told that intellectual property rewards more than its main rival. In the marketplace, particularly if you've ever read a little of economics, there is a time they used to teach us that there were things they regarded as a factor of production. And one of the most prominent factors of production was land. And so all through, we have structured our markets, we have structured our economies around land. We have structures, considerations of value around land. We have structured usefulness and identities around land. That is something that was structured by economists even as economics was being founded. Intellectual property, one, is a resource, just like land is a resource. One limiting thing about land is not portable. You cannot carry land. What you can carry is ideas. What you can carry is your talent. And a talent can cause you to move. You can uproot yourself from one market and operate entirely on another side of the globe exclusively on your talent. I wish I was told when I was turning 30 that intellectual property rewards more than land. In my country, Kenya, one of the most unprofitable organizations has more than 3,500 acres of land. The most productive company in East and Central Africa has less than 2 acres of land. So in our time, we are redefining factors of production. In our times, we are shifting ground on what is to be considered as a factor of production in this new market dynamics. In our time, ideas is the next real estate. In our time, talent and expression of your talent can be your next form of real estate. In our time, knowledge, skill, a single recipe can make you create an empire out there that land can never rival. I wish I knew when I was turning 20 that land pays, but intellectual property pays more. Ideas pays more. Knowledge pays more. Creativity pays more. Coding, you can develop an application that can catch wildfire all over the world, pays more. So I wish I was introduced, particularly in our time. Land is a very scarce resource. Land is important for the sake of habitation, for the sake of food, and that is that. Land cannot be matched with ideas. Land cannot be matched with knowledge. Land can be exhausted. We are exhausting land today, particularly in Nairobi, particularly in Kenya, we are exhausting land. I wish someone told me, young man, as you turn 20, start cultivating ideas. I wish as I was turning 20, someone told me, young man, start accumulating information. Start accumulating knowledge. Start accumulating ideas, because ideas is the new real estate. I wish I knew that as I turned 20. The last one is, while mind does not expire, the brain, on the other hand, loses its power in converting thought impulse beamed from the mind. The brain loses its accuracy. Intellectual property introduces us to two incredibly confused things. We tend to confuse the brain and the mind. Sometimes, when people talk about the mind, they are making reference to the brain. And when people are talking about the brain, they imagine to be talking about the mind. Intellectual property has distinguished those two components. There are things that you can do, and as an intellectual property observer, I can tell you, you have done that from your brain. Then there are things that I can do, and as an intellectual property observer, I will tell you that one must have come from your mind. In intellectual property, excuse me, in intellectual property, there is this test that it's called the non-obvious test. The non-obvious test helps an individual to begin to distinguish that thing that you have done that must have originated from your mind. That thing that you have done that must have originated from your brain. The most beautiful thing is that the mind, the human mind, has no limits. The human mind has no limits. The human brain, on the other hand, has limits. The human brain is physical. The human mind is not physical. So what an individual needs to know is that when you are in your younger years, particularly in your early teens, in your early 20s to your early 30s, your brain is very razor sharp. And at this point, the brain, if you can just feed your brain, if you can just donate vocabulary to your brain, if you can expose your brain to realities, if you can expose your brain to possibilities, your brain will be very accurate in converting thoughts. In intellectual property, thoughts do not come from the brain. Thoughts are impulses that are beamed from the mind. And that is the most useful thing that any person should know. If you have conceived an idea, the rate at which you convert that thought from an impulse to its corresponding projection on the human brain, it's something useful. It's something incredible. What everyone should know, someone converted a thought into this pen, a thought impulse into this pen. Another person converted a thought impulse into this lapel mic. Another person converted a thought impulse into this seat. Another person converted a thought impulse into that gadget that you're receiving this class on. The most important thing that I would want you to know, regardless of your age, is that there is a point of conversion. In intellectual property, we call it the point of intellectual property conversion. What that means is, as an individual, your brain should be equipped with the corresponding equivalent wording, phrases, so as to enable you convert thoughts that you beam from your mind. The human mind in intellectual property is a reservoir of all knowing. The human mind in intellectual property is a reservoir of all solutions. The human mind knows everything. The human mind has access to the next creativity, the next model, the next painting, the next melody, the next lines of lyrics, the next lines of code. That is trapped in the human mind. What the human brain does is the human brain extracts or draws out from the human mind. If I had been taught these 5 things when I was turning 20, I cannot tell you where I would be today. And this is why I'm telling you this. I'm hoping that you are in your early 20s and you can catch this thing and you can run with them. Intellectual property can make you do things you've never imagined. Intellectual property can give you access to doors you have never imagined existed. Intellectual property can make you create things for the marketplace in ways you've never imagined. These 5 things will change your life. These 5 things will change your career. These 5 things will change your venture. If there is someone whom we cannot help an idler. If there is one person whom intellectual property cannot help, is an idler. I want to hope that if you have come this far, you are someone who wishes to do something incredible with your life. This is not motivational speaking. This is not motivational speaking. This is building capacity in you to begin to identify that you have intellectual property. You might not have millions and millions in your bank account. You have intellectual property. You might not have access to land. You have intellectual property. You might not even know anyone who is placed anywhere. You have intellectual property. I want you to consider, if you have enjoyed this video, I want you to consider subscribing. I want you to consider clicking that bell icon so that every time we put out a video, you be among the first people who are being notified that we have new content out there. We are here to help you appreciate intellectual property. We are not going to approach the intellectual property conversations from an academic angle. We are not going to approach intellectual property from a legalese angle. We want to approach intellectual property from the angle of entrepreneurship. How you can grow a business, how you can grow a thriving career. I want to help you start approaching your intellectual property as your raw material. My name is Ogwang. Thank you so much and consider subscribing. I will see you in the next video. If you have enjoyed this video, kindly consider sharing, kindly consider liking, kindly consider commenting, and I will interact with you in the comment section. Until then, God bless and bye-bye.